Okay, well, why don't we kick it off? Well, good morning. My name is Chris Spalding. I work as Director of Sales for TERACAI, and thank you for your time this morning. We hope you find probably the next, 30 to 40 minutes or so valuable. I know it's a topic that's really on top of mind. So we're trying to do something a little different this time. We've heard from our customers that besides for the quarantine hangover feeling, many are a bit tired with their traditional informative type webinar with PowerPoint, et cetera. So we decided to host this today in more of a conversational panel-based forum. So our subject matter experts presented some FAQs that we'll be discussing, and each will have the ability to offer their own take related to the questions. We'll be posting poll questions, during this session. We encourage you to ask a question in the chat as well. We'll try to engage those in the dialogue. Participation in both the polling as well as asking questions will automatically enroll you in the drawing for the Solo Stove Fire Pit, which I heard is pretty awesome. I don't have one, but I heard it's pretty awesome. With the housekeeping orders out of the way, we're here to discuss the trends and prevention tactics related to cybersecurity. So with breaches we've been reading about with SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange, Ubiquity, Colonial Pipeline, to just name a few, it's never been more front and center. Business leaders are investing more and more time and resource than ever in trying to prevent these attacks, really so the organization is the next one you read about, right? Of course, and protect their own assets. So with this, I'd like to introduce the panel that we've organized this morning, consisting of an industry leader in both security monitoring and delivering actionable security outcomes, the industry leader in multi-factor authentication, and a value-added reseller with an ongoing mission of driving best practice security with our customers. So I want to start off with Bruce Cheney. Bruce Cheney is a senior systems engineer at Arctic Wolf, is a well-rounded cybersecurity leader, researcher, and speaker who understands the real risks and threats of the cyber attack. With 25 years of experience with strong knowledge of layer 1 through layer 7, Bruce works closely with businesses to help reduce cybersecurity risks for organizations of really all sizes. Morning, Bruce. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, glad to be here.
Next, we have Chris DeWitt. Chris is actually a senior consulting systems engineer at Cisco Duo Security. Multi-factor authentication is becoming a staple in our customers' business strategies, and Chris has demonstrated a 20-year history of working in information technology. He's actually worked for both sides of the coin as a CIO in the private sector and now on the OEM side in support of our customers with MFA. Thanks, and good morning, Chris.
Morning. Thanks, Chris.
Sure. And last but certainly not least, we have Matt Lastra, who is a Cisco CCIE data center and a CISSP. Matt is actually the senior systems architect for TERACAI. He's been with the organization for almost 6 years, but in the industry for 10. Matt works as security lead in supporting our customers' business challenges and drives the solutions with both the pre and the post-sale side of expertise. Many of you on the call today have probably already most likely talked to Matt, but we're glad to have him on. So morning, Matt. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So now that we know that the players are involved, why don't we just kick this off? So I mentioned at the beginning, we received several FAQs from our panelists to really kickstart. And again, I encourage questions throughout. But I'd like to start with Bruce. Bruce, at the top, I had mentioned the SolarWinds and the pipeline breaches. What are some of the notable trends and challenges that you're seeing as it relates to cybersecurity in 2021?
There you go. I first gong for being on mute, but thanks, Chris. So yeah, what we're seeing is a lot of these zero-day type of attacks, right? Attacks that we don't know anything about, whether they're extremely complex, like we saw with SolarWinds, or a password spraying type of attack that we saw with Colonial Pipeline. But what we're seeing is the bad guys are getting in, right? They're beating our tools. They're getting into our organizations, and they're now weaponizing our data. And what we mean by weaponizing our data is they're stealing our data and then trying to get us to pay the ransomware. And when we don't want to pay the ransomware, then they're going to release their data out to the dark web, right? So it's kind of like a double ding from a standpoint of how much pain a company gets to feel these days. The bad guys are getting more complex. They're working round the clock to beat our systems, and sadly, they're really beating up on us here in the United States lately. And it's not going to get any better, I don't think.
Yeah, totally understood. I mean, Matt, do you have any other, comments, or Chris, as it relates to, to this particular piece?
Yeah, I mean,
I guess
I would say with multi-factor authentication, it's definitely becoming the norm. Attacks, it's a cat and mouse, right? Our tools get more sophisticated, their attacks get more sophisticated, but it's also a layered approach. When it comes to how MFA is applied, right? Before, or most introductions to MFA are going to be with the remote access, right? Because we don't control, the end host. So we're trying to secure that as much as possible from whatever resources are coming into the organization. But it leads down additional layers into that of, okay, now you have remote access users using MFA, that's great, but what would you do about something that was already compromised, a system that was already brought in to the organization? And at that point, you look at the different layers of, okay, server authentication, having multi-factor authentication, network devices, network infrastructure, things of that nature that can affect your entire organization. I think is the going one step farther into how it can affect your organization as a whole, protect against someone that's already in the inside, from that angle, anyways.
And I think about all I'd have to add to that. I'd echo a lot of those statements. A lot of the big stuff, especially since COVID emerged, the big thing is BYOD. I mean, how do we maintain that trust from end to end? Basically, educating users. That's become kind of the crux of a lot of things. Is how do you keep your end users educated and aware of? I mean, if it's a BYOD device and they're accessing corporate resources, how do you best go about educating them about keeping their own equipment updated if it's not a corporate managed device sort of thing? Those are becoming more and more kind of the mantra that we actually preach from my perspective.
Yeah,
And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
I wanted to ask Chris a question, I guess, to follow up on something that Matt said. So, traditionally when we think of this, this layered approach, right, and we need to have MFA, multi-factor authentication is critical, mandatory on the outside, right? With, a LinkedIn breach and your password from LinkedIn there. And if you're using the same password, you've got a problem now where the user, could then just be logged in as, right? And MFA would hopefully stop that. But Chris, should we be thinking about MFA inside also, like when we're logging into domain controllers, and like that whole type of protection of that type of an attack vector, right? Because if I can escalate my credentials and start logging into these other machines, I mean, now I'm doing dumps of Active Directory, right?
Definitely, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, the servers, and whether it's Windows or Linux, whatever it might be, it'd be arguable to go right down to the endpoint. So if it's a Mac OS or it's a Windows OS, laptops, desktops, whatever it might be, there's really little excuse not to have MFA directly on those devices for access. They're kind of a big hole, depending on where they might be in the environment.
Oh, nice. I never thought of that.
And I don't know if it makes sense to, since that's the topic at hand, and I would imagine that probably the majority of the folks on the call are familiar, but if you could go over a little bit what MFA is, Chris, as well, and
certainly
really the go-to-market for Duo.
Yeah, well, since we do live in alphabet soup anymore, I guess for these 20 years of my career. So MFA, multi-factor authentication. I might hear second factor, two-factor authentication. So at a basic level, multi-factor authentication is something you know and something you have. So in that simple case, something you know is your username and password, and then something you have is that multi-factor portion, which might be a OTP code, it might be a push, that might be a key fob, whatever that, or it could be actually a phone callback, something like that, which we'll probably touch on some of the security wobblings of different types of MFA, but essentially it's that something you know and something you have in order to complete that authentication in a secure manner.
Yeah, and Bruce had talked to a little bit, but can you talk to really how you see most customers using MFA in their environment really upfront?
So I would say it's probably going to be a lot of stuff. Like if you're familiar with 2FA or MFA, a lot of it starts out as they want to protect. I guess if we roll the clock back a little bit to where things were a little less cloud oriented, they were trying to protect their internal applications, or usually systems. They were putting MFA probably on their firewall or something like that to theoretically secure the network. The firewall at one point that was your cornerstone of your security environment. As things have morphed, it's basically MFA started to grow into protecting not only just that on-prem stuff, but also the cloud-based applications, or I guess depending on what the situation is, even kind of that IoT of things. It's basically just kind of morphing and becoming more and more kind of a natural part of authentication. I mean, I don't even know if you can. A bank that I even know of anymore, I don't know if you can even log into your own account hardly really without an MFA. And I guess if they do allow you to log into your account without MFA, I might start talking to that bank a little bit more about changing things up, or maybe find a more secure bank.
Sure. I mean, Matt, to add some color to that, one of the things as TERACAI was moving their position in terms of what types of offerings we wanted to provide our customers, what types of demos we were open to providing it and learning more about that. You had mentioned, overwhelmingly that MFA was the first on your list too. Are you hearing those same types of responses from customers? Is that why the over exuberance basically in MFA when that question came up?
Yeah, so I am definitely seeing it more from our customer base of a need, a want, but also it's me within the industry, seeing customers' networks, seeing potential holes, and seeing how technology is escalating, and saying, within our organization, like, hey, like this is becoming something that needs to be addressed with our customers as a quality control standpoint, letting them know, hey, this is something that you should look into. So from that side of the house, I work on VPNs and firewalls all day, but it's also one of those scenarios where I see where holes are, and but I also see the trends that are happening where if we're not taking advantage of something we have versus something we know, because we are human creatures and creatures of habit, and usually using the same password, we're all guilty of it. And if someone says they're not, they're a liar. So of having the same passwords and things of that nature. So I think the trend is we're at that kind of precipice where every organization needs to start thinking about it. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing more customers request it, but just in the trend of security now, I look to see, okay, who's using it. We should mention something to them, right? So building out that core infrastructure within our organizations, going to be detrimental to helping our customers.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And Chris, do you see certain verticals or certain areas of business that are either on the forefront of using MFA more, and on the flip side, do you see certain subsections of businesses in a certain field that aren't using it where they should be?
Well, I'd say probably the two most, the biggest verticals that I'm one I mentioned already was banking and financial industry is a huge one. I mean, there's the threat is incalculable there as far as like if a bank, like say if Wells Fargo got breached one day, that probably could be fairly threatening to the rest of the banking system in theory. So it's sorry, I lost my train of thought there. As far as moving from that, yeah, I'd say a lot of your, basically any kind of your technical your I guess network or software manufacturing, a lot of that's also kind of stepping in. I mean, even like Duo. I mean, we originated with within the Google Beyond framework, which is kind of building out that zero trust part. As far as the gaps in it, I would say it's a lot of times is honestly probably in that small business environment where, and I guess I did it in my DirecTV years. You kind of go through that security through obscurity type thing. And even if it's a small business, I mean, if it's a couple hundred employees, I mean, they could have millions and millions or hundreds of millions of dollars associated with revenue or other assets that are associated with their applications or network. And basically it all kind of comes down to this: well, how well are you going to protect that authentication? Do you know that those users are actually accessing what they're supposed to be accessing, or if they're supposed to be accessing?
Gotcha. Okay. And one of the questions did come up actually, that is it possible to see some examples of MFA software such as Duo during this webinar? Ramona, we can certainly set up something, outside of that. I don't know if there's anything quick, Chris, that you would typically show in that type of scenario, or what a demo would normally look like in that regard.
I guess it depends on what if there was a specific question, I could probably pop up something rather quickly. But if they wanted to see kind of that sort of soup to nuts, how the user experience works versus the admin experience works, we probably need about 45 minutes roughly just to kind of go through that and answer some questions and things like that. So it might not fit in totality here, but I can certainly do something if there's something specific.
Perfect. Okay. Yep. I mean, and so primarily ease of use, especially in an education setting, if it could kind of be catered specifically to that. If we could set up something along that.
Yeah, certainly.
Perfect. Are there any other questions as it relates to, I asked those attending to, any other questions related to MFA? I mean, we could certainly go back to that. It certainly seems to be one of the most popular questions of now and one of the most important. So you guys probably touched on this as well, but one of the questions, Chris, that you did want to make sure that we touched on was, how does MFA provide more flexibility while pushing zero trust? I mean, did you primarily cover that, or were there other talking points that you wanted to make sure that we hit specifically to that?
I think I stole my own thunder a little bit when I talked about the BYOD stuff. So I guess not only is it you need to have that MFA in front of it, regardless of whether it's a corporate issued or BYOD device, but ultimately that educating the user, making sure that they know that their device is up to date, which I guess depending on how the MFA system is established, we can enforce that. Okay, if their phone's not up to date, or if their laptop's not up to date, we can actually ensure that they upgrade if they're required to say access a critical application type thing.
Got it. Okay. One of the questions I want to shoot back to Bruce a second too. I mean, one of the questions that kind of tied into one of Bruce's questions was really, how do we prepare organizations for unknown types of future attacks, like zero-day and supply chain? Are there certain variables or pieces that you're learning more and more at Arctic Wolf, Bruce, that kind of help organizations look down that path?
No, I think right out of the gate, we need to just make sure that we're having that layered approach, right? That we're providing defense in depth, that, we're looking at, a broad visibility scenario where you're looking across the network, across the cloud, across the human, across the identity, servers, infrastructure, wire, network flow, right? Just trying to be able to look at all that information and then correlate that information, across the entire attack surface. The bad guys are getting in. So, I feel you need to take the approach that they're going to get in, right? You have to accept the fact that they're going to get in. You can have MFA, right? We've seen MFA get beat. We've seen multi-million-dollar wire transfers and things where a CFO, at a board meeting, his phone is blowing up with an MFA, and finally he just hits it. And then all of a sudden somebody's trying to wire money because they just authenticated it. And they knew that he was going to be at this meeting because social engineering, somebody on LinkedIn said, getting ready for the big quarterly review on Friday, right? So the bad guys were watching that, they knew, and they beat it, right? They beat the MFA. So you have to assume that's going to happen. SolarWinds, supply chain, Exchange Hafnium, 0 days, Silverfish Group, more 0 day stuff, right? So they're getting in, you can't have proper protection without detection. You can't have prevention without detection. So you have to be able to be ready to detect once they get in, and then have the the plan in place, the instant response plan, to be able to take action to remediate it, squash it, contain it, and then figure out what happened so it doesn't happen again, right? They're getting in, right? We can have the best tools in the world, and they all do, right? Everybody has great endpoint. Everybody's running Sophos or Carbon Black or something. Everybody has Meraki firewalls or Sonic Wall firewalls. Everybody has Duo, right? I mean, people are running all these great tools, but we're just seeing breach after breach after breach. And the bad guys are just getting more bold, as we go on. They have no constraints against anything, and they're just going to attack us. So plan for them to get in, have an incident response plan, be ready to detect it, and then run through your plan. You do fire drills, you might do active shooter drills, do a ransomware drill, do a breach drill, do, an incident response drill, be ready when it happens, because once it's go time, that's not going to be the time to, to figure that out.
And one of the questions, to that point too, Chris, I think that we talked about quickly yesterday, the question that came in before the webinar was, can Duo be hacked, right? And you had mentioned it really makes a huge difference if someone's already in versus what's happening now, right, with Duo. So.
Yeah, and what Bruce touched on was perfect. That you take, not to pick on SolarWinds too much, but I mean, they essentially came in through a back door. I mean, it's a managed service. They weren't. Duo will protect RDP as an example. In that case, they're probably not even using RDP. They probably got their hands on the assertion certificate, and they could push themselves around through the network without ever even touching MFA. But to hack, like on the hack Duo specifically, I guess, and this would apply to any MFA provider, I would say it kind of depends on what MFA they're using. And of course, if you want to, depending on how far back in time you want to go, or I guess more to the point on what type of MFA one is using. So like, even when I'm talking to partners or end users or customers, one of the first things we point out is, well, you probably don't want to use SMS or phone callback for your authentication. And they'll ask why, and I guess, and one can look it up themselves, but even this hints at that, hey, these two forms of authentication are particularly secure. If somebody's using SMS as their secondary authentication or MFA, they go to a website, they put in their username and their username password, accuse them for the SMS code, they put in the SMS code on that same page. Well, right there, if theoretically, if you've got kind of a man in the middle attack going on already, so like evil Jinx, I believe it's pronounced, they could theoretically have that, a nefarious actor could have that running in the environment somewhere, steal the keys right off that user's machine, pop that cookie into their own browser, and boom, they've logged into, I guess, name your application, I guess, at that point, depending on what they're trying to reach into. So it's definitely possible. I mean, but again, it depends on what MFA is being selected as far as hack. I struggle with that word a little bit. But
sure,
yeah,
sure.
It's certainly possible, but I'd say with more modern authentication methodologies such as push, the likelihood is close to zero, or as close as you can get to zero.
It's going to be the user, right? The user is going to be the one that makes the mistake. That's how they're going to get in. They're not going to hack Duo. You're not going to crack the code of Duo but you're just going to get some user to accept, a bad login. And Chris mentioned this earlier. You've got to train your users, right? They need to know, like, you can't just turn Duo on and expect it to just work and it's going to be, because you have that person that gets the auth request at a bar at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night and doesn't understand what's going on, doesn't realize this is somebody trying to log in as me. And if I don't, say, no, it's not me, and then report it, it could lead to, you know what I mean? So you have to make sure that, you can implement all the technology that you want, But if you don't get, you know, the users to buy in and to understand what they're doing, you know, you might as well not even bother.
And just a prime example of that, I'll just go to our demo site, which anybody can go to. It's demo.duo.com. These are just some click-through ones, but the prime example of theirs, we're educating their user. I'm going to log in. They're going to get this notification on what type of authentication you want to use, but I'd say most of our customers use push, so I'll just go to that. The big thing here is when that individual goes to log in, is are they educated on how to most benefit from this MFA? So right away we're saying, okay, I'm logging into Microsoft Outlook. It's Chris at Acme Corp. Let's just say it's Chris. I'm that Chris. I live in the Denver area. Well, what's this login right here? If I'm a user, all I have to do is look at this and say, hey, this login's coming from Michigan. Why? I'm in Denver. Why would I log into this? I'm going to hit deny. Well, maybe I did it by accident. Then I VPN'd into something. Who knows? But maybe it is fraudulent at this point. They can click that, and that report will go off to the SOC or the NOC or what have you. So, and I'm hoping you saw my desktop there. I guess I should have asked before. But that's kind of just some of that basic.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Matt, was there anything that you wanted to add to that too before I kind of moved on to one of the next subjects?
No, I think these guys, I'd just be repeating.
Which is good. Okay, perfect. Yeah, which is good. I mean, if we're running into kind of the same messages there, then I think that'll help, obviously, in creating the unified approach to push customers in the right direction. I mean, Matt, one of the pieces that you've thought a lot about too, which again probably plays into some of what we already talked about, but the question of how does security best practices play a role with the current security landscape outside of MFA? Are there any other areas that you think would be important to touch on in this type of particular conversation?
I think like we were saying before, the biggest goal here is to make sure our users are educated. The weakest point is always going to be the end user, right? Whether it's IT or just anyone with elevated privileges within your organization, right? So there's a lot of we hate to bring it up and stuff like that, but there's a lot of scope creep that or privilege creep that happens within organizations, specifically small to medium sized organizations usually look to bend rules and when they come into privileged individuals within the organization. And sometimes that can put the organization or the systems at risk. So best practices is if you're going to have a policy, it should apply to the entire organization. Trying to keep those things in check is super hard in today's day and age, but it decreases attack surface for the organization as a whole. So I think following best practices when applying policies across the organization can be especially helpful. I know, things I've heard sometimes is, it's too cumbersome for specific individuals to use MFA or use these particular security tools because, they're not used to it or whatever the case might be. But they are the biggest targets, right, of the potential or the potential targets for the organization. So it's the only thing I can say is when it comes to best practices, we want to apply it across the board, because if you start making exceptions to those best practices, you're defeating a large portion of the of what you're trying to do, especially because those chinks in the armor are usually there for a reason. The stereotypes are there for a reason. So trying to look to patch those is a necessity.
For sure. Bruce, do you have any other comment based on best practices as well? One of your peers talked about the fact that there were certain trends that were shown in the 2020 Arctic Wolf Security Operations Report. I don't know if those were all the pieces that you covered already, or if the best practices question kind of brings in some of those other findings that you guys had from that report.
Right. No, I think, I think everybody's, hitting the nail on the head. I mean, it takes a village, right? It's not just a one person show to try to create the security. I think you have to have the defense in depth approach. You have to have, like Matt just said, talked about vulnerability management and patching. It's critical, right? I mean, if to know yourself is to know the enemy, right? If I know where all of my weaknesses are, then I can help try to, kind of squash them down and make it less of an attack surface. But the only way that you can do that is by constantly looking at yourself, checking yourself, testing yourself, how am I doing? Where are my weaknesses? And then what is the next step forward? It is a multifaceted, job, I think, and multiple layers, from the outside in, firewalls all the way down to network, based permissions. And then, kudos to Matt again on the Active Directory management, and that being correct, where he called it like project creep. We can end up with multiple, getting some echo here. We can end up with multiple, users that are domain admins because they need to reset passwords, as opposed to being able to use like a delegated authority model, or using group policy to be able to, control desktops and lock things down, making things more effective, right? So, all the way from your basic user management, AD management, group management, up to your firewalls, patch management, vulnerability management, detection and response. I mean, it's a, MFA, right? That's everything encompasses, the attack surface, and we need to try to really just address it. And it's a task. I mean, it's a lot of work, right? That's why we're having this talk today, to kind of hopefully just share some information that will just turn a light on for somebody and say, oh yeah, we better look at that. We better think about that. We have MFA, but wow, why don't we have it when somebody's manipulating domain admin members or logging directly into a domain controller? Can't we set that up too, right? And I think probably, if you already have it, it's probably pretty straightforward to set it up on multiple systems. So, that just awareness, fighting the fight, right? We're all here to fight the fight. These bad guys are ruthless. It's a vicious cycle for us.
And to kind of add to that, what I see in organizations sometimes is we're talking about educating users and things of that nature, and cross pollination between domains, whether it's networking or servers, or what I find sometimes is within organizations, you might have a very strong security factor within maybe servers, right? How they're authenticating people, how they're controlling the flow of the networks, but those individuals only work in the server side. So where you'll see a lack of security might be in areas that they don't cover, right? So it might be on the networking side, where the networking, they just don't know what they don't know when it comes to proper patch management, or addressing security vulnerabilities coming through whatever vendor they're using, or properly, right, evaluating their networks on a quarterly basis, or whenever as needed, depending on updates that might be had. But what happens is there might be a lack of knowledge in one area, and a higher amount of knowledge in the other, and you might have tools these days that can be applied across the board, right? And they might be being applied in one area, but not in another area, even though they could be. They could be utilized in that area, but again, you don't know what you don't know. So I think obviously that educational piece comes into play with kind of a cross-pollination, depending on the organization, how large they are. If they have the ability to make sure networking and server people are on the same page when addressing security issues, it can only help the organization, because they could be doing something that could actually help on the other hand, or vice versa. Yeah.
No, thanks, Matt. And actually, that kind of raises another question that I just had personally, and that is really, with IoT as persistent as it is, and with work from home now becoming obviously so much more the norm, organizations electing to, bring back only a percentage of their organization moving forward. Has that taken on a new level, or would you still kind of continue on the same type of security path with policies and, best practices, as if everyone was reporting to the office? Like, are we looking at a whole different shift in how we should be looking at security there too?
For sure. I think so. It's the way I see remote access, the same way I view DMZs, right? If I issue that computer out to that individual, right, and it's a domain computer, it has all the same security, security policies that a work PC has, then yeah, I can kind of ease up on that. But if it's a non work PC or something of that nature that I'm allowing to hop in to our resources or our network, then it needs to be treated as a potential compromised PC at that point, and highly scanned and put through rigorous policies during that. So, at least in my opinion.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree. You have to treat it like an attack surface, and you have to have visibility from it. You need to know what's going on in that machine. You need to be pulling the log files from that machine. You need to, if they're running, Sophos Intercept X on it, you need to be, grabbing the firewall or grabbing the antivirus and the endpoint logs off of that machine. If the machine is a small satellite office with 5 computers in it, with a split haul, a backhaul VPN back to corp headquarters, you need to be grabbing those firewall logs. The bad guys are smart, right? I mean, it's a full-time job for them. If they don't hack us, they don't get to buy Lamborghinis, and in the extreme cases, they don't get to eat dinner, right? It's just a 9-to-5 job for these guys to break in, and there's no risk for them, right? The authorities aren't arresting them. They're not being held and detained for us, even if we can find them. So we just need to really look at it and say, okay, this endpoint, because that user at home on that computer could go to some website and type in bad credentials, or type into a fake DocuSign landing page their Office 365 credentials, and now you could have somebody attempting to log in or gain access, or they just gain control of that machine, or they're letting their kids use that machine, and that machine it just takes one endpoint, right? One endpoint for me to steal credentials from. And now, if your stuff is in the cloud, maybe I'm getting there. So you've got to be protecting it the same exact way that you're protecting a host on your network. No difference, right? And if you can't issue company laptops, and you can't have a network policy server, and you can't put some kind of an agent on it that's going to, check for and watch the health of it, then don't let them connect. Right. Or give them, I spent a lot of time in New York State service for at the Attorney General. And for those BYOD scenarios, we built them a VDI. You can connect to our virtual desktop. You can't download anything. And basically all we're sending back and forth are screen refreshes and mouse clicks. Everything else was locked down, because we couldn't give 2,800 people laptops. Right. So, but they still needed remote access. So this is, how we did it. And you have to have rigid mobile device management, right? It's all, phones can be compromised today. So you've got to have the visibility into every single, device, IoT, whatever it is that touches your network. And you have to make sure that you're watching it and know what's going on with it at all times, 24/7, 365, set of eyes looking at all that telemetry being generated.
And I guess kind of just, I kind of look at it in a even simpler form, is just, where is the edge now? I mean, you roll the clock back, maybe 10 years or a little further. There was still an edge to the network. You had an internal and you had an external. Well, we all of us can pretty much look at each other here and go, well, that edge doesn't really exist anymore. Sure, you have those environments, but it's completely mixed. So the internal corporate environment is obviously probably going to be tied to the cloud in some fashion. You've got users that are maybe not right now as much, but they were on-prem, but they were also off-prem. Maybe they were in a different country. Who knows? And maybe they're using, like I'm sitting here, I'm on my work computer, but right here I have my personal laptop. Well, I can access corporate resources with this machine, but I can also access corporate resources with that machine. How do you tell the difference between those two? And can you structure that security to limit access to only my corporate device versus limiting or maybe adding further limitations to what would be my BYOD device? So I think kind of echoing some of the other comments there.
Nope, I think that makes sense. And can we go back to Chris to one question too? The question that John had as it related to the verification code. I think your response, if you can go into the response a little bit, because I think it accidentally came to me and not to the attendees. If you can kind of give that example.
Oh, okay.
Basically.
Certainly, yeah. So I guess on that little demo I did, it was indicated that it may be more secure to put in a passcode. That may or may not be true, depending on. We view the push is the most secure because there's not really a code exchange that somebody can visually see. So the risk, your bigger risk with the passcode is somebody possibly, I guess I use the term shoulder surfing, where somebody's looking over my shoulder and they see my code on my phone, and then they can theoretically go, if they're monitoring me, log in. They can basically go through the login process without my knowledge or input. Or consequently, if you're in an environment that maybe has a compromise where it's there's a man in the middle, so that evil Gen X, or however you pronounce it, is in place, where they could just steal that cookie with that they can just essentially copy it over again, like I mentioned earlier, paste it into another browser, into that application. So push is definitely more secure than the code.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks, Chris. So we're at about 15 to the hour. The last thing that I kind of had in mind to do, and this was really more just gut reactions to more facts and statements that we were able to find as it relates to these particular topics. So I figured I'd just go around to each of the panelists and just basically get your reaction to a couple of stats that we were finding. So if I start with Matt. So Matt, what's your response to the fact that 95% of cybersecurity breaches are caused by human error?
Not surprised.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like I've stated before, we're creatures of habit, and usually those are bad habits. So we're always going to be the weakest link within any security infrastructure, whether we're the IT people or individual users behind desks. It doesn't matter where you are within the organization. Everyone's prone to the same human nature type habits that can make for that. And the downside is people that are compromising systems, hackers or nation states or whatever is behind it. Everyone's aware of it, right? Everyone's aware that we are the weakest link and we are creatures of habit. So okay, if this password works here, then most people have Gmail. Okay, it's probably linked to their Gmail. They don't have multi-factor. Hey, look, that same password that they had for Netflix works for their Gmail. Now I can literally compromise everything else. Oh, okay, now I'm getting access to their work information. Now it's escalating, right? So it's not surprising at all. If anything surprising, I'm surprised it's kind of that low. Jokes aside, but yeah, it's always going to be that way. And us having policies and restrictions on ourselves is to try to minimize that as much as possible, right? There's a reason why we have, a required amount of passwords or a required amount of characters with special characters and things like that. It's because, we want to make simple ones because our brains can remember it. So.
For sure. No, thanks, Matt. Bruce, what about to you? What about the fact that 88% of organizations reported by Proofpoint that 88% of organizations worldwide experienced spear phishing attempts in 2019.
Yeah, same thing, right? This is the user, right? They're going to target the user specifically. They're going to, have well-crafted messages that are going to be designed to trick them. And the users are going to fall for it. The example Matt just gave where the Gmail mailbox getting compromised. I sat through that in a ransomware attack about 3 years ago, where there was a car dealership. Car salesman had his password to his Office 365 compromised, and that was actually GoDaddy mail they were using, right? So it was a GoDaddy mailbox. It was Indrik Spider, a Russian cybercrime group. They had this guy's mailbox, and they sent emails to my insurance agent at this 500-person insurance company. And the agent opened up the attachment because the attachment matched the conversation that they were having. They had talked all week about a Ford F-150 pickup and needing insurance cards for it. And the bad guys sent an attachment called F-150 dot whatever it was, .xls or whatever. The user had no reason to not open it, opened it. The bad guys were in, right? Now detect and respond, right? So that's, they're getting in, the mailbox takeovers are happening. And at that point, the detection was key to stopping that ransomware attack. So it's always the users. Not always, but I mean, 95% of the time, right? I mean, it's the users are doing something, whether they did it accidentally, which was the case in there, or, I will say, maliciously or just, without knowing any better, and they make the mistake.
And I'd echo that. That's probably one of the phishing expeditions that they've been around for a long time, and from a Duo perspective, we see the same thing. It's one of the major problems as far as loss of credentials and nefarious logins from wherever.
For sure. And for you, Chris, what's the gut reaction to that the worldwide information security market is forecast to reach almost $171 billion just by the end of next year?
Well, I guess I'd almost kind of call that rhetorical. So, yeah, it's exploding. I mean, some of it I would say obviously was probably driven by the actions due to COVID, but ultimately it's been a business driver even before that started. The COVID and everybody kind of being BYOD or remote access really was a big driver on security in general, but we've definitely seen a massive uptick, not just with us, but even with our competitors on just that explosion of the requirement and need for MFA. Even aside from executive orders recently, it's definitely something that you can easily see on the horizon. It's building ahead of steam.
And it's a problem, and it's not, the tools are selling, right? It's not the tools, and their tools are working. People are buying them, but the bad guys are still getting in, right? I mean, every time you hear somebody was breached, you don't hear they were breached, but they had no firewalls and they had no endpoint protect. No, they had all the latest tools. They're getting beat. So it's kind of sad that we're continuing to just throw tool after tool after tool at these problems when it's clearly not a tools problem. It's more of an operational issue, right? You got to blend those tools with people and processes, right? And make it more operational and alert on things. But yeah, that's a lot of, it was 120 billion last year. So that's like, a pretty decent uptick for a year to get up to 170 billion. But yeah, it's sad.
For sure.
Well, generally, most I guess network or security operations organizations generally they're not particularly heavily staffed in all scenarios. So I guess the way I looked at it when I was a senior security architect at DirecTV is there was for the one of me there was probably 100,000 trying to hit that network at any given time of day. So it's barbarians at the door, I guess was the analogy that my management used back then when I taught them. So it's just we can only do so much, but yeah, trying to keep the proper set of tools, because there's not one magic thing that's going to do it. MFA is not going to be just that magic bullet. Yeah, do we cover a lot? But no, we're certainly not going to be the end all be all to security. So.
And the last, and I'll take it a little bit, and that's just the last stat I was going to bring up is that almost 70% of business leaders feel their cybersecurity risks are increasing. And one of the pieces that we provided was a poll to the registrants. And I'm very interested in learning, back on what information you guys are hearing. Are you getting, support from your business leaders, both from a resource perspective, from a budget perspective, to be able to tackle these issues? Or are we still looking to try to, put that square peg through the round hole and try to solve some of the problems, with the same amount of resource? I mean, one of the things that we're doing at TERACAI is we're trying to move down the more increased security path, is really understand what are our customers looking for, which pieces, like Bruce had mentioned, there's so many different solutions, but if the mindset is very similar to attach a particular problem, we really love to understand more as to what your concerns are, what your business challenges are, and where your security breaches or potential breaches are the most vulnerable. And we're certainly looking forward to the chance to learn how we can assist moving forward. And Matt will be there, Bruce will be there, Chris will be there to help you along those ways. And I think I wanted to really just close on that point, right? We're 5 minutes in to the top of the hour. We very much appreciate your time. If there's any other questions in the last few minutes, please feel free to post in the chat. Otherwise, we look forward. I apologize about the beeping. That's our internal IM system coming in here. But we very much appreciate the opportunity. If there's responses or if there's questions, there is one question that was just posted by Bradley, and that is, do you typically see a rise in attacks after new operating systems are released? For example, Windows 11 just being announced in beta mode. Does anyone have an answer to that type of question?
I guess from my perspective, generally, that you'll probably have somebody doing that to a certain degree, but generally, in my experience, if somebody's trying to hack or interfere with something, they're going to go after something that has a much broader scope. So they already know when, in this example, Windows 11, Windows 10's been out there for a long time. They've had a lot more time to research what could be wrong with it. From my perspective, usually they go after the larger OS base if they're going to go after an OS.
Very good. Very good. So, and Bradley, I can ask that question around as well, actually, to other folks too, to see if there are any other piece of information we can share on that topic. And I wanted to point that out too for any of the attendees. If you'd like to continue a further conversation with any of the panelists regarding any topics, please feel free to let us know. But again, we're at 11:56. I hope this was beneficial. Thank you very much to the panelists for your time. I found it, very helpful as we at TERACAI move down this security path and assisting our customers more aggressively. And we love your feedback. We love to understand if this type of round table conversation is more helpful to you, and we will tinker and we'll toy if there's advice that you have for us moving forward. So, besides that, what we'll be doing now is we'll be compiling the information from the polls as well as the questions, and we will be alerting the winner following the webinar of the winner of the Fire Pit. So again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the panelists. If there are no other questions, I hope to talk to you all very shortly and very soon, and have a great rest of the day.
Have a great one, everybody.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.